Mountain Man takes in widow and her twins, unaware they will become his new family forever. That's how the story begins. A storm's rising in the high country, snow thick as smoke. He's lived alone for years. Fire and rifle his only company, until a knock at his cabin door changes everything. She's half frozen, clutching two children, with nowhere left to run. But winter cold isn't the only danger. Down in the valley, a ruthless rancher's already claimed her land, spinning lies sharp enough to cut through any kindness. The man of the mountains only meant to offer shelter. Yet each passing day pulls him deeper into her fight. In a town where rumors travel faster than a telegraph and justice can be bought, trust is a rarer thing than dry firewood. The snow will melt, but when it does, will he walk away as he planned or risk everything to keep the only warmth he's felt in years? Before we dive in, drop your name or city in the comments. It reminds me that behind every view is a real heartbeat. The late December wind howled across the mountain, sending dead leaves skittering over frozen ground. Elias Boone's muscles burned from a long afternoon of splitting logs, the rhythmic thunk of his axe now replaced by an eerie whistling through the bare branches. He paused to study the heavy clouds rolling in from the west, dark and brooding. The air carried the sharp, clean scent of snow. Gathering an armload of split wood, he trudged to his cabin. The familiar creak of the porch boards welcomed him home. Inside, he carefully arranged kindling in the pot-bellied stove, his movements practiced after 15 winters alone in these mountains. The first flames caught, sending welcome warmth through the one-room shelter. Sharp pounding at his door made him freeze. Out here, unexpected visitors usually meant trouble. The pounding came again, more desperate this time. Elias grabbed his rifle from beside the door, then slowly pulled it open. The sight before him made him lower the weapon immediately. A woman stood there, thin as a rail and windburned, clutching two small children beneath a threadbare quilt. Her eyes were hollow with exhaustion, but held a fierce determination. "Please," she said, her voice rough from the cold. "I'm Clara Wilkes. Road agents attacked our wagon 2 days back. We've been walking, trying to reach my father's old ranch. In the valley." She pulled the children closer. "My husband, ... He passed last summer. We've nothing left but what we carry. Just one night's shelter, that's all I ask." The twins couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, their faces pinched with cold and hunger. The boy's boots were worn through, while his sister had wrapped her feet in strips of cloth. All three shivered uncontrollably. Elias felt the first snowflakes settling on his shoulders. He'd turned away travelers before. The mountains were no place for charity. But something in Clara's steady gaze spoke of strength, not desperation. And those children. "Come in," he said gruffly, stepping aside. "Storm's coming anyway." Relief flooded Clara's face, though she kept her composure. "We're much obliged. Mr. Boone, Elias Boone." He shut the door against the rising wind. "Stove's just getting warm. Set yourselves there." Clara guided her children to the fire, her movements careful but efficient. The twins huddled close to the stove, their small hands reaching for its warmth. Now in the lamplight, Elias could see how their clothes hung loose, how their cheeks had hollowed from too many missed meals. "Got some stew left from dinner," he said, moving to the iron pot hanging at the back of the stove. "Not much, but it's hot." "Oh, we couldn't," Clara began, but Elias was already ladling the thick soup into 3 tin cups. The twins fell on the food like half-starved wolf pups, though they remembered their manners enough to mumble thank you between spoonfuls. Clara sat quietly by the fire, sipping her portion slowly, her eyes never leaving her children. "The road agents," Elias said after a while. "They take everything?" Clara nodded. "What little we had. We'd sold most already, trying to make it through. After James, my husband, passed." Her voice caught slightly. but we're blessed to be alive. The Lord provides, even in our darkest hours. The wind rose to a howl outside, rattling the cabin's windows. Snow pelted against the glass like thrown sand. Elias added another log to the stove, telling himself these folks would be gone by morning, but the storm's voice suggested otherwise. "The children can take my bed," he said. "I've got blankets enough for you by the fire. I'll sleep in my chair." "Mr. Boone, you've already shown us more kindness than we could hope for," Clara said softly. "We don't wish to impose further. Ain't imposing if I offer," he replied. "Besides, no one's going anywhere in this weather." The twins had already dozed off, curled together like puppies near the stove's warmth. Clara gently roused them, leading them to the narrow bed in the corner. They were asleep again almost before she finished tucking the quilts around them. She returned to her place by the fire, her hands folded in her lap. The lamplight caught the silver threading through her dark hair, making Elias wonder just how long she'd been carrying her burdens alone. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." Elias just nodded, settling into his chair as the storm raged outside. He wasn't one for talk, and Clara seemed to understand that. She sat quietly, watching the flames dance behind the stove's grate, while snow piled deeper against the cabin walls. Dawn crept over the mountains, painting the cabin's frost-covered windows in pale light. Elias stirred from his chair, muscles stiff from the awkward sleep. He moved quietly to the window, not wanting to wake his unexpected guests. What he saw made his jaw tighten. The world outside had vanished under endless white. Snow piled waist-deep against the cabin walls, and more kept falling in thick, heavy flakes. Clara was already awake, folding the blanket she'd used by the fire. She caught his expression as he turned from the window. "That bad?" "I ain't seen a storm like this in years," Elias admitted, keeping his voice low to avoid waking the twins. "Travel's impossible till it lets up some." A flicker of worry crossed Clara's face, but she squared her shoulders. "We won't burden you longer than necessary, Mr. Boone." Before he could respond, a sleepy voice called from the bed. "Mama, is that snow outside?" Ruth's question woke her brother. Matthew scrambled up, pressing his nose against the cold window glass. "Look how white everything is." Old Blue, Elias's hunting hound, lifted his gray muzzle from his spot by the stove. The dog's tail thumped against the floor as the children discovered him, their initial shyness forgotten in the excitement of meeting a new friend. "Careful now," Elias warned. "Blue's getting on in years." But the old dog seemed to come alive under the children's gentle attention. Soon he was sprawled by the hearth, enjoying belly rubs while the twins giggled at his contented groans. Clara busied herself near the stove, pulling a small cloth pouch from her bundle. "Please, let me contribute something for breakfast. I've a bit of flour left." "No need to," Elias started, but she was already measuring the flour into his wooden mixing bowl. "I insist," she said firmly. "We may be down to little, but we can still share what we have." Her hands moved with practiced skill, mixing biscuits without needing to measure. Soon, the cabin filled with the sweet smell of baking bread. While the biscuits cooled, Clara noticed Elias's work shirt hanging on a peg, torn at the sleeve. "I can mend that for you," she offered, threading a needle from her small sewing kit. Her stitches were neat and even, the repair almost invisible when she finished. The day passed quietly. Elias split more wood when the snow lightened briefly, while Clara kept the twins occupied with small tasks, helping to wash dishes, sweeping the plank floor, learning to whittle under his careful instruction. The children's laughter filled the cabin, making it feel warmer somehow. Despite the bitter cold outside dawn, as Clara prepared a simple supper of beans and the last of her biscuits, she began sharing pieces of her story. "My father's ranch is just over the pass," she said, stirring the pot. "Nothing grand, just a small spread in the valley. but it was home. Elias noticed how she spoke in the past tense. What happened? After Papa died, I married James Wokes. He was a good man, worked hard. She paused, pain flickering across her face. But there were debts I didn't know about. When James took fever last summer, I discovered he borrowed against the ranch. Now Mr. Harrison at the bank claims it's his. You're still aiming to claim it? Elias asked, surprised by her determination. Clara's chin lifted. It's my children's inheritance. Papa meant it for his grandchildren. If I can just prove the loan wasn't proper, or find work to pay it off. She trailed off, but her eyes held. Steady resolve. The twins had fallen asleep on Blue's bed. The old dog curled protectively around them. Clara covered them with a quilt, her touch gentle. That night, after Clara had moved the children to the bed, Elias lay on his bedroll by the fire, listening to the storm's fury. The wind screamed down the chimney, but beneath it, he heard Matthew murmur something in his sleep, followed by Ruth's soft giggle. Those sounds stirred something long forgotten in his chest. How many years had it been since laughter echoed in this cabin? Since anyone besides Blue waited for his return from hunting? The thought made him uneasy, yet he couldn't deny the strange warmth it brought. A particularly fierce gust rattled the windows. The snow showed no sign of stopping. If anything, the storm was gaining strength. Elias stared into the stove's dying embers, accepting what he'd known since morning. These 3 souls were now in his care, at least until the weather broke. The thought should have troubled him more than it did. He'd survived 15 winters, alone in these mountains by being cautious with strangers. But his sleep finally claimed him, Blue's contented sighs mixing with the children's peaceful breathing. Elias found himself less bothered by their presence than he'd expected. 3 days passed like molasses in winter. The blizzard's fury gradually eased, leaving behind a crystalline silence and bone-deep cold that made the cabin's timbers crack. Though confined by weather, the small group fell into an easy rhythm. Elias discovered the twins had quick minds and eager hands. He showed them how to choose good whittling wood, guiding their small fingers on the knife handles. Steady now, he'd say, watching Matthew shape a crude bear. Let the blade do the work. Ruth proved particularly skilled, her wooden rabbit taking shape with surprising detail. Clara absorbed every bit of practical knowledge Elias shared. She paid close attention as he demonstrated snowshoe repair, her nimble fingers quickly mastering the intricate weaving of gut strings through the wooden frames. These could save lives out here, she said, testing the tightness of her work. That they can, Elias agreed. Seen more than one fellow lost in deep snow for want of proper shoes. Evenings brought a peace Elias hadn't known in years. Clara would bring out her worn Bible, its pages soft from use. By lamplight, she read stories of faith and perseverance. Daniel in the lion's den, Ruth's loyalty to Naomi, David's courage against Goliath. The twins listened wide-eyed, while Elias found himself drawn into the familiar rhythms of Scripture he'd nearly forgotten. On the 4th morning, weak sunlight filtered through breaking clouds. Elias pulled on his heavy coat. Need to check my trapline, he announced. Might be something worth saving, if the snow hasn't buried everything. The trail was brutal. Snowdrifts reached his chest in places, and the bitter wind cut through his layers like a knife. He'd checked 3 traps when he spotted movement, a dark figure struggling through the white expanse. Hello, the trail, Elias called out, hand moving to his rifle. That you, Boone? The voice was familiar. Jake Merritt, his nearest neighbor from 5 miles down the mountain, emerged from the swirling snow. The old trapper's beard was thick with ice. Lord's mercy, Jake, what brings you up here in this weather? Jake's weathered face was grave. Been trying to reach you 3 days now. Got news you need to hear, especially with that widow and her young ones staying with you. Elias felt his stomach tighten. What news? Henry Lasker's making his move on the Wilkes place. Jake spat into the snow. Claims Clara's husband borrowed heavy against the property last spring. Lasker bought the note from Harrison's bank, and now he's pressing Judge Morrison to grant him the deed. Already? But Clara only just Lasker works fast when he wants something. Jake's voice held bitter knowledge. Word is, he needs that land for when the railroad comes through. He's been buying up every piece he can reach. Clara mentioned the loan, but she thought it was with Harrison's bank. Elias frowned. How'd you come by this news? My boy works at the telegraph office. Saw the messages flying between Lasker's lawyer and the judge. Jake adjusted his pack. Thought you ought to know, considering. Elias thanked his old friend and hurried back to the cabin, trapline forgotten. Inside, Clara looked up from her mending, hope in her eyes. Any luck with the traps? He hated watching that hope fade as he relayed Jake's warning. Clara's face went pale, her hands trembling as she set aside her work. I knew Mr. Harrison had a claim, but Lasker? She swallowed hard. They say he's ruined 3 families. Already, taken their land through bad loans. We'll ride down to town soon as the trail breaks, Elias promised. Get this sorted proper with the judge. Clara nodded, but her eyes were distant. That evening, she barely touched her food. After the twins were settled in bed, she knelt beside them, her whispered prayers barely audible. Lord, please. Babies need a home. Show us the way through this trial. Elias watched from his chair by the fire, something protective stirring in his chest. He'd heard tales of Henry Lasker's dealings, how the wealthy rancher used the law like a weapon, how those who opposed him often found themselves facing mysterious misfortunes. Looking at Clara's bowed head and the sleeping twins, Elias knew he couldn't stand aside and watch it happen again. Blue patted over and laid his gray head on Elias's knee, brown eyes wise with understanding. Outside, the wind had died to a whisper, leaving behind a strange, waiting stillness. The moon cast long shadows through the frosted windows, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf called out across the endless white dot by week's end. The endless white world transformed. The deep snow developed a thick crust that could bear a man's weight, nature's own bridge across the drifts. Elias studied the terrain from his cabin door, boots crunching on the crystalline surface. Reckon we can make town now, he announced, turning to Clara. Snow's firm enough for the sled. Inside, Clara nodded as she wrapped thick wool socks around Matthew's feet. How long a journey, do you figure? 3 days if we're lucky, 4 if the weather turns. Elias moved with purpose, gathering his season's take of furs, beaver, mink, and fox pelts he'd planned to sell come spring. The soft furs filled 2 large bags, representing months of careful trapping. The preparations took most of morning. Elias hitched his 2 mules to the heavy wood sled, their breath steaming in the crisp air. He packed extra blankets, dried meat, coffee, and beans. Clara contributed what little she had, some cornmeal and her precious small pouch of flour. Ruth watched wide-eyed as Elias wrapped hot stones in flannel and tucked them into the sled. What are those for, Mr. Boone? Keep your feet warm, little miss. Cold's the real enemy out here. Clara bundled the twins in every quilt they could spare, turning them into such round little packages that Matthew giggled. We look like bear cubs. They set out as the winter sun climbed past the peaks. The mules moved steady but slow, their hooves breaking through the crust in places. Elias walked alongside, leading them, while Clara sat in the sled with the children pressed close. The first day passed in a series of short runs between warming stops. Every few hours, Elias called a halt. They'd huddle together, sharing hot coffee from his battered pot and warming their hands over small fires. The twins made a game of stamping their feet to keep circulation flowing, counting steps in sing-song voices that echoed off snow-laden branches. That night, they made camp in a sheltered hollow. Elias showed Clara how to build a snow wall to block the wind, and they slept close to the fire, taking turns keeping watch. The children slept soundly, but Clara's eyes stayed open long into the night, reflecting the dancing flames. The second day brought them to lower elevation, where the wind-carved snow made travel easier. By afternoon, Elias spotted the old line. Shack, a simple one-room shelter used by cowboys during summer grazing. "It ain't much," he said, "but it beats another night under stars." The shack's roof sagged under its white burden, but the walls stood strong. Inside, Clara swept away dead leaves while Elias got a fire going in the crude stone fireplace. The twins explored every corner, delighted by this new adventure. After a supper of beans and the last of Clara's cornbread, the children drifted off to sleep on their bed of pine boughs. Clara sat close to the fire, her face thoughtful in the flickering light. "My father built our ranch house himself," she said softly, breaking the evening silence. "Spent 2 years getting the timber just right. Said anything worth having was worth doing proper." She looked up at Elias, determination hardening her gentle features. "I aim to fight for that land, Mr. Boone. Not just because we need shelter, though Lord knows we do. That ranch represents everything Paye believed in: honest work, treating the land right, dealing fair with neighbors." Elias studied her face, seeing past the worry lines to the steel beneath. Here was no helpless widow seeking rescue, but a woman with the same pioneer spirit that had built the West. He'd been thinking of her as a burden to be delivered to town. Now he saw a partner in what promised to be a fierce battle for justice. "Then, we'll fight," he said simply. "Lasker ain't the first man to try building his fortune on others' misfortune, and he won't be the last. But he ain't won yet." The third day dawned clear and cold. They made good time down the valley, and by afternoon, the first wisps of chimney smoke appeared against the pale sky. Clara sat straighter in the sled, pulling the twins close as the town's outlines emerged from the whiteness. Main Street welcomed them with the crunch of snow under mule hooves and boot heels. The familiar sounds of civilization filtered out from the building's piano notes, from the saloon the clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the murmur of voices from the general store's porch. But Elias noted the wary looks that followed their progress. Strangers weren't common in winter, and news traveled fast in small towns. More than one face turned quickly away when he met their gaze. He kept his hand close to his rifle, suddenly grateful he brought not just the furs to sell, but his full kit of ammunition as well. Clara must have sensed the tension too. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, but her chin stayed high as they made their way down the street, ready to face whatever challenges awaited them in this snowbound town. The boarding house stood 3 stories tall, its whitewashed walls gleaming against the snow. A neat sign proclaimed Avery House, Christian Lodging, and warm lamplight spilled from its windows. Mrs. Agnes Avery met them at the door, her gray hair tucked neatly beneath a lace cap, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of her unexpected winter guests. "We've 2 rooms available," she said, smoothing her apron. "One for the lady and children, another for the gentleman." She quoted a fair weekly rate, adding, "Includes breakfast and supper. We say grace at every meal." Clara's relief was visible. "That sounds wonderful, Mrs. Avery. We're much obliged." The rooms were simple but clean, with thick quilts on the beds and small wood stoves for heat. Matthew and Ruth bounced on their mattress, delighting in its softness after weeks of sleeping. "Rough. Settle down now," Clara cautioned, though she couldn't hide her smile. "We're guests here." Elias didn't linger. "I'll head to the trading post," he said. "Get these furs sold while there's still daylight." He carried his best pelts, leaving the rest secured in his room. The trading post's owner drove a hard bargain, but Elias came away with enough coins to see them through a few weeks. He purchased supplies they'd need, fresh ammunition, coffee, sugar, and warm socks for the twins. Meanwhile, Clara made her way to the county clerk's office, a cramped room that smelled of dust and old paper. The clerk, a thin man with ink-stained fingers, shuffled through his files at her request. "Ah, yes, the Wilkes Ranch," he said, adjusting his spectacles. "Mr. Lasker filed his claim 2 weeks ago. Shows an unpaid loan of $800 against the property." He cleared his throat. "Default proceedings begin in 2 weeks' time." Clara's hands trembled as she gripped her shawl. 2 weeks? But that's hardly time to. Law's the law, Mom. Unless you can prove payment or show the loan was fraudulent. Back at the boarding house that evening, Mrs. Avery served a hearty beef stew with dumplings. The dining room hummed with conversation as regular boarders, mostly railroad surveyors and cattle buyers, shared their day's business. Matthew and Ruth had already made friends with the cook's grandchildren, who showed them secret hiding places beneath the stairs. Their laughter echoed through the halls, bringing smiles to weather-worn faces. Elias and Clara sat at a corner table, heads bent close as she related her visit to the clerk. $800, she whispered. James never mentioned such a loan. We were struggling, yes, but we'll figure something out, Elias assured her, his voice low and steady. First light tomorrow, I'll start asking questions. Somebody in town must remember the transaction. Mrs. Avery brought them extra cornbread, her motherly instincts clearly engaged. "You poor dears look half-starved," she clucked. "Eat up now." But the next morning brought trouble on the wind. Clara returned from the general store with more than supplies. She carried the weight of whispered words and sideways glances. "They're saying terrible things," she told Elias, her voice catching. They stood in the boarding house parlor, away from curious ears. "Mr. Lasker's been telling people I'm not really a widow at all, that I'm running from the law back east." Tears threatened but didn't fall. In a town this size, such talk spreads like wildfire. Elias's weather-worn face hardened. "Lasker's trying to poison the well before we can even draw water." His fingers drummed against his gun belt. "Playing folks against you so no one'll help when he makes his move. What can we do?" Clara watched through the window as her twins played in the snow with their new friends. "If people believe his lies... Time I had a talk with Henry Lasker," Elias said, his jaw set firm. Man to man. "Be careful," Clara touched his arm. "He's powerful here. Connected." "Maybe so." Elias's voice was quiet but carried steel beneath. "But I've dealt with his kind before. Men who think money makes them untouchable." He patted Clara's hand. "Don't you worry. We'll set things straight." Through the parlor window, they could see the twins building a snow fort with the other children, their laughter carrying through the glass. Ruth waved when she spotted them watching. The sight strengthened Clara's resolve. "I won't let him take their future," she said softly. "Not with lies." Mrs. Avery appeared in the doorway, concern etched on her kind face. "I've been hearing some unsavory talk in town," she said carefully. "I want you to know, my house stands on truth and Christian charity. You're welcome here as long as you need." Clara's eyes filled with grateful tears. "Thank you, Mrs. Avery. Your kindness means more than I can say." Elias pulled on his heavy coat. "I'll be back before supper," he said, checking his gun was loose in its holster. "Time to have a word with Mr. Henry Lasker." Asterisk. The saloon's warmth hid Elias like a wall as he stepped through the swinging doors. Tobacco smoke hung thick near the ceiling beams, and the afternoon crowd clustered around tables, nursing drinks against the winter chill. Henry Lasker held court at the largest table, surrounded by 4 men who laughed too loud at his jokes. Elias recognized the type, men who followed money and power like wolves after wounded prey. He approached the table, boots quiet on the sawdust floor. "Mr. Lasker," Elias said, his voice carrying just enough to silence nearby conversations. Need a word. Henry looked up, amusement playing across his face. He was well dressed in a black wool suit, a gold watch chain draped across his vest. Well now, if it isn't the mountain man himself. He gestured expansively. Come to join civilization? Come to discuss Clara Wilkes. Elias remained standing, one hand resting near his gun belt. And the stories you've been spreading. The amusement fled from Henry's face. Private business matters don't concern you, friend. They do when you're spreading lies about a decent woman. Elias's voice hardened. A widow trying to claim her rightful property. Henry's laugh was sharp and cold. Rightful? That ranch has a debt against it, properly filed and witnessed. As for the widow, he shrugged. Well, seems mighty convenient her husband's not around to verify her story. You know full well she's telling the truth. Do I? Henry leaned back, spreading his hands. Seems to me you've gotten awful protective of these strays you've adopted. Tell me, what's a hermit like you doing, playing guardian angel to a pretty young widow? His cronies chuckled, but Elias didn't rise to the bait. Stop spreading rumors, Lasker. Let the law handle the property dispute. Oh, it will. Henry's smile didn't reach his eyes. And when it does, I'll see your precious widow and her brats out in the snow before spring thaw. That's a promise. Elias's fingers twitched near his holster. That sounded like a threat. Just business. Henry's voice dripped false sincerity. Nothing personal. Though I do wonder what folks would think, her living up in that cabin with you. All this time, That's enough. Elias's words cut like ice. A tense silence fell. Even the piano player missed a note. Henry's men shifted uneasily, hands drifting toward weapons. But Henry just smiled and raised his glass. Good day to you, mountain man. Give the widow my regards. Elias turned and walked out, his back straight, feeling eyes follow him through the doors. The winter air cooled his anger as he headed toward the church, seeking answers from another source. Reverend Thomas Wilkes, no relation to Clara, was sweeping snow from the church steps. The elderly preacher paused his work when Elias approached. Afternoon. Mr. Boone, something troubling you? Henry Lasker, Elias said simply. The Reverend's face grew serious. Come inside. He led Elias to his study, a small room lined with books. After closing the door, he spoke quietly. I've watched that man's dealings for 15 years. Never could prove anything. The double quotes. He shook his head. What kind of dealings? Land. Grabs mostly. He has a way with contracts, loaning money, then changing terms. Sometimes papers go missing. Sometimes they appear with different numbers than folks remember signing. The Reverend sighed. 3 families lost farms to him last year alone. But he's careful, keeps everything looking legal. And the local judge owns him a favor or two, I expect. The Reverend's eyes were sad. I've tried speaking up, but without proof. Elias nodded slowly. Much obliged for the information, Reverend. Mr. Boone? The old man's voice stopped him at the door. Whatever you're planning, be careful. Lasker doesn't fight fair. Back at the boarding house, Clara sat with him in the parlor as he related what he'd learned. The twins played checkers nearby under Mrs. Avery's watchful eye. A lawyer might find holes in his paperwork, Elias suggested. If he's been changing numbers, ... Clara twisted her hands in her lap. I've never dealt with lawyers. Wouldn't know where to start or how to pay one. Let me handle that part. Elias's voice was gentle. I've saved some money over the years. Never had much use for it until now. Outside, fresh snow began to fall, thick flakes dancing past the windows. Time was pressing in around them like the winter storm. I trust your instincts, Clara said softly. You've shown nothing but kindness since that first night we appeared at your door." Ruth looked up from her game. "Mom, look, it's snowing again." They watched the snow together, each lost in thought about the battles ahead. The parlor fire crackled, throwing warm light across their faces as evening settled over the town. Morning light crept over the snow-covered hills as Elias made his way to the outskirts of town. His boots crunched through fresh powder toward a modest cabin where smoke curled from the chimney. Judge Amos Kettering had retired 2 years ago after serving the territory for decades, and now lived quietly with his books and memories. Elias knocked on the worn wooden door, adjusting the stack of papers under his arm. After a moment, shuffling footsteps approached. "Who's there?" called a gruff voice. Elias Boone. The door opened to reveal Amos Kettering, spectacles perched on his nose. Despite his advancing years, his eyes remained sharp beneath bushy gray brows. "Well now, mountain man, been a spell since you brought in that fellow who was poaching your trap lines." "That's partly why I'm here, Judge." Elias stamped snow from his boots. "You helped me then. I'm hoping you might help someone else now." Amos studied him for a long moment, then stepped aside. "Come in then." Fire's warm. Inside, the cabin smelled of pipe tobacco and old leather. Books lined every wall, and papers covered most surfaces. Amos cleared a space at his desk, lighting an oil lamp despite the morning light. "This about the Wilkes widow?" he asked, settling into his chair. "Word travels fast in small towns." "Yes, sir." Elias laid out Clara's loan papers. "Henry Lasker claims her husband took a loan. Something about the terms doesn't sit right." Amos adjusted his spectacles and began reading, occasionally muttering to himself. Hours passed as he referenced law books, made notes, and scrutinized every detail. Elias waited patiently, stoking the fire when needed. Finally, Amos looked up, satisfaction clear on his weathered face. "Well now, seems our friend Henry got greedy with his numbers." "How so?" "Interest rates illegal under territorial law." Amos tapped the papers. "Can't charge more than 12% annually on secured loans. This here shows 18%, hidden in the fine print. Grounds for dismissal if brought before a proper court." Hope stirred in Elias's chest. "You're certain?" "Been interpreting these laws 30 years. Amos's eyes twinkled. "Might be retired, but I still know my business." Meanwhile, at the boarding house, Clara moved quietly between rooms, carrying bowls of steaming broth. Influenza had struck several residents, including 8-year-old Sarah Mitchell, who lay feverish in an upstairs bedroom. "Here now, sweetheart," Clara murmured, helping the girl sip the hot liquid. "This will help you feel better." Mrs. Avery appeared in the doorway, watching Clara's gentle ministrations. "You have a way with the sick," she observed, "like my own mother did." "My mother taught me," Clara replied, dabbing Sarah's forehead with a cool cloth. "She always said healing was God's work through human hands." The girl stirred, blue eyes opening. "Aunt Margaret was supposed to visit today," she whispered. "Aunt Margaret?" Clara asked softly. Mrs. Avery nodded. "Sarah is Henry Lasker's niece, his sister's child." Clara's hand stilled for just a moment, but she continued tending the girl without comment. Throughout the day, she moved from room to room, changing linens, preparing willow bark tea for fevers, and ensuring everyone was comfortable. Other townspeople came and went, bringing supplies or checking on sick relatives. They watched Clara work, noting her quiet efficiency and unfailing kindness. Whispers began to circulate, different from the rumors Henry had spread. As evening approached, Matthew and Ruth helped clear dishes from the evening meal, eager to be useful. The boarding house kitchen filled with warm steam from washing water, and savory aromas from the day's cooking still lingered. "You children have been a real blessing," Mrs. Avery said, watching them carefully dry each plate. Most young ones would rather play than work. Mama says helping others is important, Ruth replied seriously, though her eyes were heavy with fatigue. Matthew nodded, yawning, like Jesus washing feet. Clara smiled at her children, heart swelling with pride. But soon both twins were nodding over their tasks, nearly asleep where they sat. That's enough for tonight, Mrs. Avery said kindly. These little ones need their beds. Clara gathered her drowsy children, but paused at the kitchen door. Mrs. Avery, thank you for letting us help today. The older woman's face softened. You've shown your true character, Clara Wilkes. That matters more than any rumors. Upstairs, Clara tucked the twins into their bed, their faces peaceful in sleep. Through the window, she could see fresh snow beginning to fall, and somewhere in that gentle darkness, she knew Elias was probably still awake, planning their next move against Henry Lasker. For the first time since arriving in town, she felt real hope warming her heart. Between Elias's steadfast support and the changing attitudes of the townspeople, perhaps God was indeed working through human hands, not just for healing, but for justice as well. The news of Clara's gentle care during the influenza outbreak spread through town like warmth from a hearth. Each morning brought small tokens of neighborly kindness to the boarding house door. Martha Jensen left a basket of fresh-baked bread, still warm from her oven. Old Tom Wheeler dropped off a stack of split firewood, saying gruffly that he had extra to spare. Even the seamstress's wife brought 2 pairs of wool mittens for Matthew and Ruth, carefully knitted in cheerful red yarn. Clara found herself blinking back tears at each gesture. After months of struggling alone, these simple kindnesses touched her deeply. The twins wore their new mittens proudly, making snow angels in the boarding house yard while their mother watched from the window, her hands busy mending sheets for the recovering patients upstairs. Mrs. Avery noticed the change in town sentiment too. The Lord works in mysterious ways, she said one morning as they prepared breakfast together. Sometimes it takes hardship to show folks' true nature, both the good and the bad. As if summoned by those words, the boarding house door burst open with a bang that rattled the windows. Henry Lasker stormed into the dining room, his face dark with rage. Several breakfast patrons looked up in alarm as snow fell from his coat onto the clean floor. Where is she? He demanded, eyes scanning the room until they fixed on Clara. You! He jabbed a finger in her direction. What have you done to my niece? Clara stepped back, clutching a dish towel. I don't understand. Sarah's fever spiked. Last night, after you were the one tending her. His voice rose to a shout. Convenient timing, isn't it? Poisoning an innocent child to get back at me. Mr. Lasker. Mrs. Avery's voice cracked like a whip. She stepped between him and Clara, her thin frame somehow filling the space. How dare you come into my establishment making such accusations? Stay out of this, Agnes, Henry snarled. This woman is not what she seems. She's trying to turn the town against me, and now my own blood. The only poison here is coming from your mouth, Mrs. Avery cut in. Clara has done nothing but care for that child day and night. Sarah's fever is from the influenza, as you well know. Now get out of my boarding house before I have the sheriff remove you. Henry's face twisted. He looked past Mrs. Avery to Clara, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. This isn't over. You'll regret crossing me. He turned and stalked out, leaving the door open to the bitter wind. Mrs. Avery shut it firmly, then turned to Clara, who had gone pale. Don't you fret, dear. That man's all bluster. But Clara's hands trembled as she set down the dish towel. He means what he says. When Elias heard about the confrontation, his weathered face grew stern. We're filing those papers. Today, he declared. Amos found the legal crack in his armor, and we're going to use it. That afternoon, Clara sat straight-backed in the courthouse as Elias and Amos presented their findings to Judge Parker. The elderly judge peered at the loan documents through his spectacles, listening intently as Amos explained the illegal interest rate hidden in the contract's fine print. 18% annually, Your Honor, Amos said, pointing to the relevant clause. Territory law clearly states 12% maximum for secured loans. Judge Parker nodded slowly. This warrants a proper hearing. 3 days from now, 10 o'clock sharp. He fixed Clara with a kind but serious look. Be prepared to present any additional documentation regarding your claim to the property, Mrs. Wilkes. Back at the boarding house, Clara helped the twins with their letters, while Elias sat in the corner, methodically cleaning his rifle. The familiar click and scrape of the cleaning rod filled the quiet room. I thought you didn't believe in solving problems with guns, Clara said softly, after sending the children up to bed. Elias ran the oiled cloth along the barrel one more time before answering. I don't. This isn't about using it. He set the rifle aside and looked at her steadily. It's about remembering where the lines are and being ready if someone else chooses to cross them first. Clara understood. Like the rifle, the law was a tool that could protect or harm, depending on the hands that wielded it. They would fight Henry Lasker with truth and justice, but they couldn't ignore the darkness they'd glimpsed in him today. 3 days, she murmured, gazing out at the snow-covered street. 3 days until the hearing. Elias nodded, his voice quiet but firm. 3 days to pray that justice speaks louder than money. Outside, the winter wind whistled through the eaves, carrying the promise of another storm. But inside the boarding house, surrounded by signs of neighbors' kindness and warmed by the heat of righteous purpose, Clara felt stronger than the weather. The morning dawned brittle and cold, frost etching delicate patterns on the boarding house windows. Clara sat at breakfast with the twins, watching them eat their porridge while trying to memorize every detail of their faces. Matthew's careful way of blowing on each spoonful, Ruth's habit of saving the sugar-sprinkled bits for last. Something in her heart felt uneasy, though she couldn't say why. The heavy tread of boots on the porch came just as they finished. Marshal Cray entered, removing his hat, followed by 2 stern-faced deputies. The dining room fell silent. Mrs. Wilkes, the marshal said, his voice carefully neutral. I need to speak with you privately. Clara's fingers tightened on her coffee cup. Whatever you need to say, Marshal, you can say it here. He cleared his throat, producing an official-looking document. Ma'am, I have county orders to take temporary custody of Matthew and Ruth Wilkes, citing unsafe winter conditions and... He hesitated. Unfit guardianship. The cup slipped from Clara's hand, shattering on the floor. What? No, Ruth cried, grabbing her mother's arm. Matthew stood up so quickly his chair toppled backward. This is outrageous, Mrs. Avery protested, stepping forward. These children are well cared for. Marshal Cray's face showed discomfort, but his voice remained firm. The order's been signed by Judge Whitman of the county court. The children will be housed at the territorial orphanage until the property dispute is settled. Please, Clara's voice cracked as she clutched her children close. Let me go with them. They've never been apart from me, not once since they were born. I'm sorry, ma'am. The order specifically states you have no legal guardianship rights until the ranch claim is resolved. He nodded to his deputies, who moved forward. Mama. Ruth screamed as gentle, but firm hands began separating them. Matthew fought like a wild thing, kicking and shouting until one of the deputies lifted him bodily. Clara tried to follow, but Marshal Cray blocked her path. Don't make this harder than it has to be, Mrs. Wilkes. They'll be safe and warm at the orphanage. They're safe and warm with me. Clara's voice rose to a pitch she barely recognized. They're all I have left in this world. The sound of boots on the porch steps, the crunch of snow under wheels, and then the terrible sound of her children's cries fading into distance. Clara burst past the marshal, running outside into the bitter cold without her coat. The county wagon was already moving, her children's faces pressed against its back window, their hands reaching toward her. Clara ran after it, snow soaking through her shoes, until her foot caught on an icy rut and she fell hard. Dot's strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. Elias had appeared from somewhere, helping her up as she sobbed. He wrapped his coat around her shoulders as they watched the wagon disappear around the corner. "Henry," she choked out. "This has to be Henry's doing." Elias said nothing, but his jaw clenched tight as stone as he held her. Snow began to fall, soft and silent, covering their footprints as Clara wept against his chest. The boarding house was tomb quiet that night. Clara sat in the twins' room, holding their abandoned mittens, unable to sleep. The sound of movement in the hallway drew her attention. She opened the door to find Elias fully dressed, packing his saddlebags by lamplight. "What are you doing?" He didn't look up from his work. "Going to have a word with Henry Lasker." "Elias, no." Clara grabbed his arm. "He's dangerous. You saw what he did today. Exactly why I'm going." He finally met her eyes. "Some things need saying man to man, away from lawyers and courts. He'll hurt you. Maybe." Elias's voice was quiet. "But I've watched that man hurt you and those children enough. Sometimes a man has to decide what he's willing to risk for what's right." Clara's hand fell away from his arm. She recognized the look in his eyes, the same unwavering resolve she'd seen in her father's face when he stood against cattle thieves years ago. "At least wait until morning," she pleaded. Elias shook his head, checking his gun belt. "I'm riding. Out at first light. Henry's ranch is 4 hours hard ride. I want to catch him early, before he has time to gather his men around him." He turned to her then, his weathered face softened by the lamplight. "I need you to trust me, Clara. I'm not going to do anything foolish. But there are some things worth standing up for, even when the odds aren't in your favor." Clara watched him finish his preparations, her heart heavy with fear, but also touched by his determination to help her family. As the eastern sky began to pale, Elias shouldered his rifle and saddlebags. "Promise me you'll be careful," she whispered. "I promise." He paused at the door, looking back at her. "Pray for wisdom. I aim to appeal to whatever conscience that man has left, if he has any." The sound of his boots on the stairs, the quiet click of the front door, and then the muffled hoofbeats of his horse fading into the pre-dawn darkness. Clara stood at the window, watching until he disappeared into the gathering light of morning. Her children's mittens still clutched in her trembling hands. The snow began falling harder as Elias guided his horse through the white-draped valley. Icy pellets stung his face, and he pulled his scarf higher, squinting against the strengthening squall. His saddlebags hung heavy with his winter's take of beaver and mink pelts, worth plenty to any trading post. If Henry had any interest in dealing fair, the wind cut straight through his wool coat, but the cold in his bones wasn't just from the weather. Those children's faces haunted him, their terrified cries as they were taken from their mother. No amount of legal papers made that right. Henry's ranch emerged from the swirling snow like a fortress, tall gates and sturdy fences marking the boundary of his empire. 2 mounted men appeared through the curtain of white rifles across their saddles. Elias recognized Tom Evers, a usually quiet hand who'd worked these parts for years. The other was one of Henry's newer thugs. Trigger-happy and mean-dash-eyed Henry himself rode out to meet them at the gate, looking pleased with himself despite the brutal weather. "Well, if it ain't the mountain man, come down from his cave." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "What brings you out in such unfriendly weather?" Elias kept his voice level, though his fingers ached to reach for his gun. "Come to make you an offer, Henry, about Clara Wilkes's children." "Ah, yes, the poor unfortunates." Henry's mock concern dripped with satisfaction. Safe and warm at the orphanage now. Thank goodness. Much better than freezing in some boarding house with their vagrant mother. I've got my entire winter's haul. Elias patted his saddlebags. Brine pelts, worth more than that loan you claim she owes. Take them, clear the debt, and let those kids go home to their mother. Henry threw back his head and laughed, the sound sharp against the howling wind. You think I care about a few mangy furs? This was never about money, you fool. He leaned forward in his saddle. Without those brats to worry about, that pretty widow will give up and move on. Then that ranch land will go to someone who knows what to do with it. Tom Evers shifted in his saddle, a frown creasing his weathered face. Boss, those kids ain't done nothing wrong. Maybe we could— Shut your mouth, Evers, Henry snapped, his genial mask slipping. You're paid to work, not think. But Elias had caught the look in Tom's eyes, disgust poorly hidden. He wasn't the only one, either. The other ranch hands within earshot suddenly found great interest in their reins or the falling snow. Those children are suffering, Elias said quietly. Their mother's heartbroken. Is that the kind of man you want your hands to see you as, Henry? Someone who'd hurt innocent kids to get his way? Henry's face darkened. Get off my land, mountain man. Next time, you show up here uninvited. My boys won't be so polite. He wheeled his horse around, calling over his shoulder, and tell that widow she's got 1 week to clear out, or I'll have the marshal escort her to the territory line. Elias sat motionless in the snow, watching Henry ride back toward his house. The 2 guards remained, but Tom Evers wouldn't meet his eyes now. Something had shifted, though, a crack in Henry's wall of control that hadn't been there before. Let's go on now, Tom muttered, just loud enough to carry over the wind. Nothing more to be done here today. Elias turned his horse back toward town, the taste of defeat bitter in his mouth. But he'd seen something worth noting. Not everyone in Henry's employ was comfortable with his methods. That might matter, given time. The church bells were ringing evening service when he returned to town. He stabled his horse and walked through the deepening snow to the small wooden building, drawn by the warm light spilling from its windows inside. He found Clara kneeling alone near the altar, her voice soft but clear in the empty sanctuary. Lord, watch over my babies tonight. Keep them warm and safe until I can hold them again. Give me strength to fight for what's right, no matter how hard the path becomes. Elias stayed by the door, not wanting to interrupt her prayers. The lamplight caught the tears on her cheeks, but there was steel in her spine as she continued. And Lord, if it be your will, help those who have hardened their hearts to see the truth. Show them that hurting children can never serve your purpose. She fell silent then, head bowed. Elias turned to leave, but a loose board creaked under his boot. Clara looked up, quickly wiping her eyes. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I tried to reason with him, offered all my pelts to clear the debt. But he wouldn't listen. It wasn't a question. No, he set on forcing you out. Elias moved closer, his voice gentle. But not everyone agrees with what he's doing. I saw it in their faces today. Even his own men are troubled by this. Clara nodded, rising slowly from her knees. Then we'll keep praying, and we'll keep fighting. God sees the truth, even when men try to hide it. The church grew quiet again, save for the soft hiss of snow against the windows and the crackle of the sanctuary's small stove. Outside, darkness gathered early, as it always did in these short winter days, but the light inside held steady against. The gathering night dawn painted the eastern sky in streaks of pale gold, though the air remained bitter cold. Frost coated the courthouse steps where Clara stood, her breath forming small clouds in the January morning. Beside her, Elias adjusted his borrowed tie, a concession to propriety that seemed to irritate him more than the freezing temperature. Reckon we'd best head inside, he murmured, noting other townspeople beginning to arrive. Hearing set to start in 20 minutes. Clara nodded, smoothing her faded black dress with trembling hands. 2 days without her children had carved deep shadows under her eyes, but her spine remained straight as a fence post. The heavy wooden doors groaned as they entered the courthouse, their boots echoing on the plank flooring. They had just settled onto one of the hard benches when hurried footsteps drew their attention. Tom Evers burst through the doors, another ranch hand, Bill Whitman, close behind him. Both men looked trail-worn and anxious, their hats clutched respectfully in their hands. "Mrs. Wilkes," Tom called out, striding toward them. "Ma'am, we got something you need to hear before the judge starts." Elias rose, positioning himself slightly in front of Clara. "What's this about, Tom?" "Evidence," Tom said, his voice low but urgent. "Been keeping quiet too long, watching Henry work. His schemes. But taking those kids, that was the last straw." Clara's hands flew to her mouth. "Evidence? What sort of evidence?" Bill Whitman pulled a leather document wallet from inside his coat. "Account books, loan contracts. Been collecting these for months, never knowing quite what to do with them." He glanced around nervously. "Henry's got a whole system for forging signatures, changing dates, adding zeros to loan amounts after folks sign. He did it to my own brother last spring," Tom added bitterly. "Lost his place over $100 that somehow turned into $1,000 on paper." Clara's hands shook as she examined the documents they offered. "These signatures, they're clearly different versions of the same names, and the ink colors don't match where the amounts are written." The courthouse began filling with townsfolk, their curious whispers rising as they noticed the unusual group huddled near the front. Mrs. Avery, from the boarding house, slipped into the bench behind Clara, reaching forward to squeeze her shoulder. In silent support at precisely 9 o'clock, the doors swung wide again. Henry Lasker strode in, looking imperial in his fine wool coat. His confident smile faltered slightly at the sight of his ranch hands standing with Clara and Elias. "What's the meaning of this?" he demanded, color rising in his face. "Tom? Bill? You're supposed to be checking fence lines this morning." "Checking our consciences instead," Tom replied steadily, though his hands tightened on his hat brim. "Can't stand by no more, boss. Not after what you did to those children." Before Henry could respond, the bailiff's voice rang out. "All rise. For the Honorable Judge James Maxwell." The judge, a silver-haired man with sharp eyes, took his seat and surveyed the crowded courtroom. "I understand we're here regarding the foreclosure claim on the Wilkes Ranch property." His gaze settled on Clara. "Though I've also received some disturbing reports about the removal of minor children from their mother's care." "Your Honor." Tom stepped forward. "Before you proceed, we have documents you need to see. Evidence of systematic fraud in Mr. Lasker's loan contracts." Henry's face turned purple. "This is outrageous. These men are common laborers trying to slander a respected businessman. The court will examine any relevant evidence," Judge Maxwell stated firmly. He gestured for Tom and Bill to approach with their documents. "Though I warn you both, making false accusations in this courtroom carries serious consequences." "We understand, Your Honor," Bill said quietly. "But a man's got to live with his choices. We're choosing truth." The judge spent nearly an hour reviewing the papers, the courtroom so quiet you could hear the scratch of his pen as he made notes. Clara sat perfectly still, her fingers locked together in her lap. Elias remained at her side, his presence solid and reassuring. Finally, Judge Maxwell looked up, his expression grave. "Mr. Lasker, these documents show a clear pattern of fraudulent behavior. Multiple contracts with forged signatures, altered amounts, and falsified dates." He held up Clara's loan paper, "including this one, which bears similar signs of tampering. Lies, lies, and fabrications." Henry sputtered, but his face had gone pale. "You can't take the word of disgruntled employees over. I can and I will," the judge cut him off sharply. "Especially as these documents provide enough evidence to warrant a full investigation of all your business dealings." He shuffled through more papers on his desk. "I'm hereby dismissing the foreclosure claim against Mrs. Wilkes's property. Furthermore, I'm issuing an immediate order for the return of her children from county custody." A murmur ran through the courthouse. Clara pressed her hands to her heart, tears spilling down her cheeks. Elias gripped her shoulder gently, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "Court is adjourned," Judge Maxwell announced, rising from his bench. "Mr. Lasker, you will remain here with the bailiff. We have some additional matters to discuss regarding criminal charges." The crowd began to stir, their voices rising with excitement and speculation. Outside the courthouse windows, more townspeople had gathered, curious about the proceedings. Clara stood slowly, still trembling with emotion as she turned to face Tom and Bill. That afternoon, Judge Maxwell's gavel struck with finality. "The debt is hereby declared void, and all rights to the Wilkes Ranch property are restored to Mrs. Clara Wilkes, effective immediately." He peered over his spectacles. "Furthermore, I order the immediate return of Matthew and Ruth Wilkes to their mother's custody." Clara pressed her handkerchief to her lips, tears flowing freely. Beside her, Elias squeezed her shoulder in quiet support while Mrs. Avery dabbed at her own eyes with her sleeve. "Thank you, Your Honor," Clara managed to whisper. Without waiting another moment, she gathered her shawl and hurried from the courthouse, practically running the 3 blocks to the county orphanage. Elias followed at a distance, his long stride, keeping pace as she rushed through the snowy streets. The orphanage matron had barely opened the door when twin cries of "Mama" echoed through the hall. Matthew and Ruth burst past her, flinging themselves into Clara's waiting arms. Clara dropped to her knees in the snow, gathering them close, pressing kisses to their wind-chapped cheeks. "My darlings, my precious ones," she murmured into their hair. "We're going home now. All of us, together. Together." From the doorway, Elias watched the reunion, his weathered face softening. Something caught in his throat as Ruth reached up to wipe tears from her mother's face, while Matthew clung to Clara's skirts as if he'd never let go again. Word spread quickly through town. Henry Lasker was seen leaving his fine carriage that afternoon, his influence crumbling like old barn timber. Few bothered to wave goodbye. As evening settled over the town, warm light spilled from the boarding house windows. Mrs. Avery had arranged a celebration supper, and neighbors arrived bearing gifts of food. Mrs. Peterson's apple pies, fresh bread from the Baker family, preserves and pickles from a dozen different kitchens. The dining room hummed with conversation and laughter. Dishes clinked pleasantly as plates were passed, and the twins sat close to their mother, sneaking extra bites of pie when they thought no one was looking. Clara's face glowed in the lamplight. Joy having erased the worry lines of recent weeks. Mrs. Avery moved among her guests, refilling coffee cups and ensuring everyone had their fill, her face beaming with satisfaction at seeing right prevail over wrong. A week later, the morning sun cast long shadows across the valley as Elias's mule-drawn wagon approached Clara's inherited ranch. The modest spread lay nestled against rolling hills, a clear creek threading silver through the pastures. Matthew and Ruth bounced excitedly in the wagon bed among their few belongings, pointing at everything they passed. "Look, Mama, there's the apple trees Pa talked about," Ruth called out, spotting the small orchard. The house stood weathered but proud, its log walls solid against the mountain winds. A tin roof gleamed dully in the morning light, and an old swing hung from a sturdy oak branch. Clara's eyes misted as she recognized the careful craftsmanship in every detail, her father's handiwork. Inside, dust motes danced in sunbeams, streaming through unwashed windows. Clara ran her finger along the mantel, memories flooding back with each familiar surface. The twins darted from room to room, their boots echoing on the plank floors. "It's just as I remember," Clara whispered, touching the smooth, warm banister. Elias wasted no time getting to work. The barn roof needed patching, and he climbed up with boards and nails, while Clara attacked years of dust with soap and determination. By afternoon, she had the hearth gleaming, ready for its first fire in too long dot. As evening settled over the valley, they gathered around the kitchen table, lamplight casting warm shadows on freshly scrubbed walls. The children's eyes grew heavy as they finished their supper of beans and cornbread. Elias cleared his throat, his usually steady hands fidgeting with his coffee cup. "Clara," he said softly, "I've been thinking." He paused, gathering courage. "Would you consider, that is, might you think about staying up in the mountains? With me?" His voice grew quieter. "Or perhaps I could stay here?" Clara looked up, her eyes meeting his across the table. The lamp flame flickered between them as a slow smile spread across her face. "Perhaps," she said gently, "the Lord meant for our paths to cross that snowy night." Outside the window, patches of bare ground showed through melting snow. The first tentative signs of spring whispered promises of new beginnings. As inside, two hearts found their way home by late spring. Clara's ranch had transformed from its winter slumber. The pastures, once silent under snow, now echoed with the playful bleating of newborn calves wobbling beside their mothers. Fresh green grass carpeted the valley floor, dotted with tiny white and yellow wildflowers that swayed in the gentle breeze along the creek bank. Behind the house, Clara's vegetable patch showed neat rows of tender shoots pushing through the dark soil. She had planted carrots, beans, and potatoes, marking each row with careful stakes. The twins had helped her plant, their small hands eager in the fresh-turned earth. Matthew and Ruth spent their days following Elias as he worked the land, learning the rhythm of ranch life. They carried tools in their little hands, watching intently as he showed them how to mend the winter-damaged fences. "Hand me that hammer, son," Elias would say, and Matthew would beam with pride as he passed it over. Ruth struggled with the heavy wire, but insisted on helping anyway, her determination matching her mother's. "Pa, is this post straight enough?" Matthew called out one afternoon, and Elias's heart swelled at the word "pa" falling so naturally from the boy's lips. Ruth had started using it too, the name feeling as right as spring itself. When Sunday arrived, they hitched up the wagon early. Clara had pressed their best clothes, and the twins sat straight and proud as they rode into town for church service. The wooden chapel's bell rang clear across the valley, calling the faithful to worship. Townspeople greeted them warmly on the church steps, genuine smiles replacing the suspicious glances of winter. Mrs. Avery hugged Clara tight, whispering how well the children looked. Inside, the family filled a pew together, their voices joining the familiar hymns. After service, Elias and Clara stood beneath the old cottonwoods, their leaves dancing in the spring breeze. No words were needed as they bowed their heads in silent gratitude. Elias felt humbled, knowing God had blessed him with this family when he had been so alone, so undeserving of such grace. The sun was sinking toward the mountains as they rode home, painting the sky in shades of gold. The peak stood ancient and proud against the evening light, watching over the family as they made their way back to the ranch. Matthew and Ruth's laughter mingled with the creak of wagon wheels, a sound sweeter than any music to Elias's ears. If you believe stories can heal, lift, and connect us, this channel is for you. Thanks for being here. Hit subscribe, and I'll meet you again tomorrow with something real.